Thanks very much, Ray. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I hope at the end of my 15-minute session, if I get there without Ray hooking me off, I hope you all feel like you've really learned something to take away and implement in everyday work, because I think, to be frank, we really do need, as a profession, to start implementing some of these gamification techniques that have been described and discussed these past at least 10 years. But first, we need to take a step back and remind ourselves quickly exactly why we ought to be gamifying our surveys. It's not to make them look pretty. It's not really to improve participant engagement. What it's really needed for is for better data. It was John Krosnick at Stanford University who first applied Herbert Simon's concept of satisficing to survey research. He recognized that survey taking is not actually always an easy thing to do. It's cognitively burdensome. That's to say, it makes your brain hurt. The burden comes from the tasks that we ask people to do, particularly tasks of memory and indeed of self-reflection. It's considerably easier to ask how many different magazines have you read in the past year and how many copies of each did you read than it is to recall the correct answer. And what you get then is a satisficed answer. That's an answer that satisfies the task to some degree, but is not the optimal full answer. So if I ask for all the brands that a person knows, they will tell me just enough to satisfy me and the task, and this might not be very much. So how does gamification work to overcome satisficing? To understand this, we need to understand motivation, and this is not something that researchers are particularly good at. Krosnick does talk about motivation through urging participants to commit to the process or creating a sense of value and accountability. His advice is good, but it's not the full story. For this, we need to turn to psychology, where we find similar terms to satisficing: apathy, amotivation, and in these states of motivation, a task will not be done or will not be done correctly, which is precisely the same outcome as under satisficing. Take the example of Detchi and Ryan's self-determination theory. They tell us precisely how to move people up the continuation of motivation towards a state of intrinsic motivation. To do that, you only need to stress 4 things: autonomy, that the participant freely chose to do it; relatedness, that people like them do this very thing; value, the activity has value; and importantly for our topic today, competence, that they are good at this. And what better way could there be of making someone feel that they're good at something than making it into a game that they can win at? Unfortunately, most market research questions don't lend themselves easily to this. Let's look at another psychological model, Csikszentmihalyi's flow model. Now, being in a state of flow is roughly equivalent to being intrinsically motivated, and it's where we'd like to get people. Csikszentmihalyi has 2 dimensions to his model: the challenge level of a task, you can see here on the y-axis, and the skill level of the person doing it on the x. Krosnick already told us that the burden of a survey can be quite high, and this is not equivalent to a high challenge. It just means hard work. These are not the same thing. Krosnick advocates reducing the burden by making the task easier, which is good advice if you're asking hard questions. Csikszentmihalyi would advocate moving in the opposite direction, making the task itself more of a challenge. And for us, that means turning it into a game to be played and won. Let's think about the skill level required to answer a market research survey. Basically, it's 0. You're being asked questions that, in theory at least, you can answer. No skills required. The challenge, also low. And that puts market research participants generally in a state of apathy. In fact, it's a wonder we get any good data at all. So let's say we build a game and it's challenging. What happens if the skill level doesn't match the challenge? Up at the top left, we can see the word anxiety. This is probably not a state we want to get people into. We need to increase the skill level, or the perceived skill level, by telling people they're competent, good at games, just as Detchi and Ryan would suggest. Now, the reason why many researchers find it hard to praise respondents for their competence is that they recognize the challenge is not hard. It therefore feels somewhat patronizing to say well done for something that everyone can do. In fact, we tend to go the other way with highly skilled participants. Many studies have found a positive relationship between data quality and participant tenure. That's to say, the longer the participant has been doing surveys, the better they get at them. In fact, they do them very quickly, and they're in a state we find at the bottom right, relaxation. Now, we often choose to punish these people by cutting them out of our data sets for speeding. We describe them as professional respondents. That's another story. Where we want people to be in this schema is anywhere in the upper right quadrant, in control, in arousal, or in flow. We can't get them there using our standard surveying techniques. They're not challenging enough. So we know why we should gamify, so why don't we do it? The answer to this is not clear-cut. Here's just a few excuses on screen for not doing it. We don't know how to, we don't have time, the programming skills, it's too hard, we're not creative enough. All of these, as I say, I think are just excuses. You don't need any particular programming skills, nor does it necessarily take a long time. It's only true if you think you have to build a computer game, perhaps a quest or with badges and stuff, but you don't have to. And I think we are creative enough. We're just held back basically by ourselves, by our outdated textbooks, and perhaps by our outdated colleagues. First thing we have to do is decide what a game is. And it's pretty much anything you like, as long as it has rules and people do it for pleasure. In our world, of course, it's a mental activity. And you may wonder if participants do it for pleasure. And I can tell you, I think they do. You might be thinking that participants do it for the reward, and that might be a motivating factor for joining a panel, but it's not a sustainable motivation. In fact, interestingly, the SDT theory, Detchin and Ryans, tells us that extrinsic rewards tend to undermine intrinsic motivation. You'll know this for yourself if you think about it. I mean, you might willingly help a neighbor if they asked you to change a tire on their car. If they offered you 50p for doing it, you'd think differently about it, because now it's work, and it's badly paid work at that. Now, even people in the world from games design don't think about games in a way that you might imagine. Danny Day, who is a games designer, was quoted as saying, "I don't necessarily believe games have to be fun to be games. A game is chiefly the decision to keep playing." How you get someone to keep playing is about motivation, and then we're back in SDT with autonomy, relatedness, value, and competency. In our world, we might expand this definition of a game a little to say a game must have an objective, a set of rules, and some kind of mechanic to play. And it's the mechanic that normally worries people most, but it shouldn't. We already have a mechanic. It's the question we want to ask and the means by which we collect the data. So all we really need to do to make a survey question into a game is to reframe it as a game and attach some rules to it. What I'm going to show you is a game that just uses text, had a positive data outcome, and it simply adds in these game-like elements. Then I'll go on to tell you how we decided what those rules should be. So here's a standard spontaneous brand awareness question on subject mobile phones. I'm sure you can all write these in your sleep. I did. Notice it has an objective in there to write down all the brands of mobile phones you can think of, but it isn't a game. To make it into a game, we simply stated that it was a little game. We then added a rule. We gave them 60 seconds. We told them how they can win by getting 10. As a spur to motivation, we simply wrote, "And your time starts now!" exclamation mark. As a mechanic, we used 10 separate open boxes, which acted as a visual reminder of their progress towards 10. Now, this is not the only game we could have played. In fact, it wasn't the only game we played. We also ran a variant of this where instead of asking for a maximum of 10, we stipulated we needed to get at least 5. And I'll come back to that game and share the data results. But first, we need to discuss the burning question of why 10. To be honest, it wasn't that hard. I mean, I knew it had to be stretching, but not so stretching as to be impossible. If I'd asked for 20 brands, I assume no one would know that many. The task would be too challenging. So I used an old school technique and I did a bit of desk research. Here in the UK, there's not that many retailers of mobile phones. The big independent one, Carphone Warehouse, the big airtime suppliers, O2, Vodafone, EE, and they probably account for the largest part of the market. So just looking at their websites, I can see they tend to stock around 8 brands each, and between them they listed 13 separate brands. It would come of no surprise to anyone to find out that these 13 were the top 13 brands mentioned in the study once we'd done it. Now, there are more phone brands than this in the world, but these are the major ones. In fact, the UK sample gave us 40-odd brands in total, but after the top 13, the numbers mentioning each drop off very quickly. So perhaps the right number to ask for would have been a maximum of 13. But to be honest, that just sounds plain weird. I mean, no one has a game that asks you to name 13 things unless it's a game that's centered around the wacky number 13. So 10 is what you might describe as a natural number in a way that 9 or 8 or 11 isn't. The next natural number coming down would have been probably 5. But if we said 5, we might have cut out an awful lot of data. Of course, if we'd asked for 5 brands, we would have allowed more people to win, in inverted commas. Now, I would say at this point, it's important to remember why we're playing games. Sure, it's good to let people win. It shows them that they're competent, which is motivating, but this mustn't get in the way of good data. We can always find some way of praising the participant for whatever they respond. Another point to mention, we had that 60-second clock running on the question page, but we didn't auto-advance the page after 60 seconds. Again, the aim is not playing games, but to get good data. So setting the rule is a mixture of desk research, just asking around the office in the same way that you would build a brand list, you can do that. And then using a sensible natural number given the set of brands you think are big in the market. And this number is probably going to change whatever the category is and the number of brands that are available, but it needs to be somewhat stretching without being demotivating. I'm sure you've been dying to see the data change. Here it is. The standard question is in blue, the gamified one in gold. Let's look at some particular areas of these distributions. The first is the number of people not able to give us an answer at all on the far left. This remains pretty much the same in both treatments. Saying nothing is a special case. For some people, it's their truth, and it isn't affected by gamification. In fact, some of these people told us they didn't have a mobile phone at all. Others are doing what's called strongly satisficing, or you might think of cheating, and are deliberately not filling in this survey. Gamification doesn't overcome that. We have to find some other way of dealing with that. The big blue spike at number 1 is pure Satisficing. I mean, it beggars belief that people only know one brand in this day and age. In fact, the gamified version really tells us the proportion who only know one brand, and it's very small. From there, the entire distribution shifts rightwards. I mean, you look over on the far right, how many people were able to give us 10 brands. And that final bar, the blue bar, tells us how much data we lost. We lost some data from people who know more than 10 brands, but only very few people give us more than 10. The average went from around 4 to at least 6 brands per person. I've labeled this chart winners and losers. Of course, if you consider that getting 10 is winning, then the majority of people actually fail at this game. The rule here was actually deliberately ambiguous. It said to a maximum of 10, so it wasn't strictly a rule at all. In fact, if you gave everything you know, then in actuality, you'd won. The other game treatment had a more defined rule. Remember, this one said you had to get at least 5. This implies that 5 means failure, but also potentially a license to satisfice. We could be telling people if they get to 5, then that's enough work. But why 5? In this case, we also did something old school. We ran a short pilot study to see how many brands we'd get in that other gamified question, the max of 10. The average there was 6, so 5 was a good result and achievable. So if the first gamified study had given us the full truth, then this version was likely to reduce the number of brands we got by legitimizing Satisficing. So let's see that data. First thing you see is that massive spike in the number saying 5, the purple bars are the second game. But we need to see where these people are coming from. If it's Satisficing, we'd see them coming from the right-hand side of the graph. In fact, the numbers saying 6 through 10 remain pretty much the same. What has happened is that those who would have given 2, 3, 4 brands are pushed to give a few more to get to that 5 as instructed. The first game then still has some Satisficing behavior, and this game produces even better data. Even so, many people still lose. How can we stop them being demotivated by the game? Next. Quite simply, we tell them that they did well. It doesn't really matter what their actual performance was. Remember that game mechanic had 10 separate open boxes? It's a visual aid, but it also enabled us to count how many brands were given by counting the number of boxes with something in them. So assuming they gave us at least one brand, we fed that back to them and told them that they'd done well. Well, the fact that everyone gets the same feedback is something each individual will never know, since they don't get to talk to each other. Combining both of these games might give us the perfect game. First, we do the max of 10 game, and then maybe we feedback if they gave fewer than 5 and tell them that others are able to get one more than they did. Would they like to think harder, give us another? Not only would this give us more data, it would also add in the relatedness motivator as well, and bring in some measure of interactivity, making it feel that someone or something is reading their responses in real time. That opens up a whole world of possibilities that we don't have time to go into now, because we have to summarize. Firstly, a game is anything you like as long as it has rules. People will play by those rules, and we want them to win. So choose your rules carefully, given the category that you're working in. It's vital to feedback performance positively. This is what motivates and drives people along that skill level axis. But you shouldn't get carried away either in the game or in how you think of people who don't play the game at all or do not win at the game. They're still giving us data. Winning is not important. Getting better data is, and gamification brings that. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for attending this one, and to NewMR for having me. Here's my contact details if you want to pick up the subject directly with me. But from now, it's back to Ray, who's going to moderate the Q&A session.